Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the Hypershade panel and go through some of the basic processes that we can use the panel for in regards to texturing models. In the last video we took a quick look at applying materials onto objects just through the right click menu, and we had a look at some attributes and settings for some of those materials, and we're going to now look at how we can apply materials using the Hypershade. So there's two ways we can access the Hypershade panel. The first way is to come up to the window menu at the top of the screen and down to rendering editors and across to Hypershade. And when you select that, the Hypershade panel will open up as a free floating panel like this. Now, one of the issues you might find when you're doing this on a Mac is that this panel sometimes might be treated as a separate piece of software to the main window. You can see here on this PC, I can have this Hypershade active, and when I click on another part of the interface, like up here for example, this panel still remains at the front, so it doesn't disappear. Sometimes with some software on the Mac, when you do that, this panel may disappear behind the main software. And it makes it a bit more difficult to actually access it because it keeps hiding behind the main interface. So this is one option, and if you've got let's say two monitors and you're using a PC, or even two monitors for your Mac, you can always move this over onto your second monitor and just have it open permanently. That works really well. But if you're using a single monitor, then the following method for accessing this panel might be a little bit more easy and efficient. So the other way of accessing the panel is to come down to your viewport presets, and you're looking for a panel called Hypershade Perspective. Now in this version, which is my 2013, this button actually has an additional editor on it, which is called the Node Editor. So this one's a little bit different, but basically what you're looking for is something that says Hypershade Perspective or Hypershade Persp, like this. So when we click that, it'll split our viewport into two panels. One panel will be the perspective view that we were already on, and the other one will be the Hypershade. And in this case, this bottom part for me is the Node Editor. This was added in during or it was added into the software in version 2013. So for those of you using the previous version at school, you won't have this panel here. This panel is a slightly more updated version of this work area panel, which was and is part of the Hypershade. They serve similar functions, except that this node editor is a little bit more flexible and a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm just going to ignore that node editor for the time being. So let's take a look at the Hypershade. So this is my Hypershade just here. There's three main areas. We've got the Create panel, which is over here, and this can be accessed using this little button just here. Toggle the Create bar on and off. So you just click this little button and it pops open and closed. Then we have sort of our main sort of node bin area. Okay, you've got this little bin tab and this create tab. You're really not going to really use this bin tab at a basic level, just the create section. So over here, yeah, you've got this basically a materials storage panel. Really, this just displays all of the different materials currently existing in your scene. It has a number of tabs along the top, which also shows you, for example, textures. This will have a list of all of the different images you've imported into Maya to use as textures or backgrounds and so on in your scenes. And then you've got like a list of like your rendering nodes and lights in the scene and cameras in the scene and so on. Really all you're going to need to worry about is the materials tab. Below that you've got the work area, and this is where you actually connect different nodes and materials from this panel together to create different texture effects within your materials. Now you can minimize and maximize these panels or turn them on and off over here. I can turn the create bar off, but you can turn these on and off using these three buttons here. You've got show top tabs only, so if you turn that button on, basically your work area disappears. If you use the middle one, the work area reappears, but you lose your kind of list area for your materials. And then the third button turns both of the panels back on again. So that's those three buttons there. So the first four buttons just here actually are for viewing the three different panels in different combinations. Okay, so let's take a look at the connection between the Hypershade and applying materials onto our objects. You can see over here I've got two objects, a polygon sphere and a polygon cylinder. I've got a few divisions set on the cylinder here, and I also have a reduced number of divisions for the axis. Rather than 20, I've got 8 set up, and this was just because I used a reduced number the last time I used this tool, and it's remembering those settings, but that's fine. Okay, so let's create a new material. In order to create a material in this panel, what we do is we have the create bar open, and we can scroll down this list just here and choose a material. Now in this case I'm going to stay with the basic materials, and I'm going to create a Phong this time. In the last video we took a look at a Blinn and a Lambert, and I'll use a Phong this time. You can see it pops up here and it's called Phong 1. Now I can double click on Phong 1 over here, and that will open the attribute panel on the right hand side, which we're familiar with from the last video, and I can rename my shader just here. Now you can also right click on the node on this side and come down to rename, and then rename the shader from this little pop-up option that appears. So I'm just going to call this, let's call this red. Let's call this red checker shader, like this. Just press enter, and you can see over here that pops up. Now notice the difference that occurred when I renamed from this side using this option just here, and I typed spaces in. It's removed those spaces, okay, from over here. Now over here, if I type the exact same thing in, so I say red space checker space shader, so I've typed it in exactly the same way. When I press enter, you'll notice that instead of removing the spaces, it replaces them with underscores. That's a pretty common thing in Maya. Sometimes, depending on where you're typing something in, or depending on where you're doing something, the result may end up slightly different. So just keep that in mind. Depending on where you're typing something in, it may actually change it, or enter it in a different way than if you type the exact same thing somewhere else for the same attribute in this case. So let's modify this shader a little bit. So I'm going to call this, I've called it red checker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a checker pattern to this object. So if I scroll down my list here, I've got a little node, a little texture node called checker, and what I'm going to do is drag this into the work area. You can see I've got my shader. My shader has appeared here in the work area, so I'll just middle mouse drag this in over here, and if I press A, if I click in the work area and press A, it'll zoom out so I can see those materials or nodes. Now you can click and drag these around to reposition them like this, and the little connectors in between will stretch like that. So I'm just going to position these like this. I'll close off the create tab bit at the moment, and I might just resize this up a little bit so I've got a bit more room and you can see this more clearly. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to connect this checker to this shader so that the checker pattern appears as a coloration for this shader. So to do that, I can middle mouse drag this here onto this material node, and then when I let go of the button, this little menu pops up and I can select color, and that will connect it together. Oops. Another way of doing it is to select the shader and then middle mouse drag this over into the attribute editor and drop it onto the channel you want to connect it to. So in this case, I want to connect it to color. So if I drop it there, you can see it connects. We get this little connector line. It says checker 1 out color. So that's the color coming out of here is connecting into the red checker shader color. So this is the red checker shader, and it's going into the color for this. So this colors this. And we can see that connection here. We've got color, and at the end of the slider, we've got an input button. So normally it would look like this, and this is where there's no inputs occurring or no connection. When we get this little button, it means something's plugged in to this attribute. And if we click this, it will take us to the node that's connected. So in this case, it's checker 1, which is this, checker 1. Now I can change the settings for this over here in this panel, and it will change this. And because this changes, this will then change. So for example, if I change the color over here, I can change this maybe to green. What this will do is change all the white to a green color. And you can see there it's changing the color of this. So I can plug in lots of different things from over here into different settings over here to gain different effects on my materials. So let's create another one. We will grab, let's have a look here. I'm going to select, I'll grab another checker. Okay, so I'm going to middle mouse drag that in. You can see here it's called checker 2. I'll just turn this off again. So this one's called checker 2, like this. And all I'm doing is just navigating around in the viewport as I normally would, and I'm just arranging things so they're a bit more neat. Okay, so I've got the two checkers. I've got checker 1 and checker 2. Now I'm going to call this one, I'm going to rename these so I can tell them apart. I'm going to call this one green color check. Okay, so green color check, and this one I'm going to call this trans check, and that's short for transparency. Okay, now what I want to do is kind of change this one so that it's not going to line up exactly with this one. So I'm going to take this node, which is the placement node, and I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to try and rotate this here. I might do this in a minute so we can see it interactively occurring on the object. So what I'm going to do is connect this onto this shader as well. So I'm going to click on the shader, and I'm then going to middle mouse drag the trans check pattern onto transparency. And you can see up here what happens, and over here as well. I might zoom in here so we can see this. So what's happening is all of the white areas on this pattern are causing this material to become transparent. And you can see that they line up with the areas of green on this material. So in order for them to not cover up all the green areas, I'm going to try and adjust this a little bit using the placement node, which is this one. So if I take the rotate UV and I just dial it up a little bit, you can see it's changing the angle. You can even see it here. It's changing the angle of this pattern so that it's not completely overlapping all the green. It's actually covering parts of the green and parts of the black. Now what I could do is probably type in 45 here, and it would place this texture like this at a 45-degree angle. So this is at 90 degrees and this is at 45. And the result that we're getting is this kind of weird diamond pattern of transparent parts. Okay, so that's all well and good, but how do we get this onto these? Okay, so let's take a look. First of all, I've got my solid shade active over here, which is or smooth shade, and that's number 5 on the keyboard. So it'll either be wireframe like this. What you want to do is set that to smooth shade all, and that's number 5. So we've got a couple of different ways of applying materials in Maya. The first from the Hypershade. The first thing we can do is directly middle mouse drag the shader from here onto an object, and when we let go of the mouse button, basically it will apply that shader. Now at the moment what's happening is you'll see that if I just undo that, you'll see that the color changed a little bit. In order to see these patterns appearing on the object, we have to have this set to smooth shade, but we also have to turn textures on, which is this little black and white sphere. So if I click that on, and then drag the material onto here, I will then be able to see the result. Now you'll notice at the moment what's happening is it's only showing the color value of this material, so only the green and black. It's not showing us the transparency. Okay, if I select a shader like this and I scroll down, we have this hardware texturing option down here. If I expand that out and go to textured channel, sometimes you get an option that says all channels, okay, and you can select that. All right. Now in this case it's not doing that, okay. Basically these wouldn't be visible in this method. So the other thing that you can do in order to see the transparency is to come up to the top of your perspective view. I'll just hit my spacebar just to kind of position this a little bit more easily at the top. What you can do is come across to high quality just here, and if you select that, it will then render the object in a high quality mode where you can see the transparency in real time in the viewport like this. So I can actually see the invisible or where the invisible or transparent sections are. Now this can be determined by your graphics card. If you've got an old computer, or your graphics card's not sort of a newer graphics card, or it's sort of a not as powerful graphics card, you may not be able to switch this high quality on. Sometimes I've found that with older computers or sort of lower range computers, they don't often have a graphics card capable of displaying this, so just keep that in mind. But most modern computers will be able to display this type of transparency. I'll just tap my spacebar again to get back out to my double view. Alright, so that's one way of applying a material. We can just middle mouse drag it directly onto the object. Now the other way of doing it is to select an object like this, and we can right mouse click on the material we want to apply, and we can hit assign material to selection just here, and that will also apply material. Now that method allows us to apply material to multiple selections at the same time. So if I just quickly make a couple of new objects like this, I'll just duplicate them a couple of times. Oops. So I can have a couple of other objects here. If I have them all selected like this, and I come up to my shader and I right click on it and hit assign material to selection, it will assign it to all of the selected objects at once. So it's a really quick method. I'll just undo that. If I try and middle mouse drag this, you can see it will only apply to the one object I drag to. So dragging your material on will only affect the one that you drag to, but if you right click on the material and hit assign material to selection, it applies it to all of them. Now I can also, if I just reset this, I can also apply material to specific polygons. So if I just select some polygons here, like this, I can also apply material to selected polygons using the same option, like that. So that also works. Now a handy little thing that we can also do is we can select materials, or we can select objects or polygons that have specific materials on them. So if I wanted to select all the polygons that this checkerboard pattern is applied to, I can right click on the checkerboard material here, and I can go to select objects with material. And when I let go of the cursor on there, you'll see that the sphere and the 3 cubes select, and also the polygons will select on the cylinder. The only things that aren't selected are the polygons on the cylinder that have the original Lambert 1 material applied to them. So that's a handy way of being able to select objects, or parts of objects, very quickly, without having to go through and individually selecting specific polygons. But keep in mind that only works if those polygons have a different material applied to them than the rest of the model or models. Now I can reapply material, material onto those. So for example, if I pop open my panel again, and let's say I just create a blin, let's say. So I've got this blin here, and I'll just change the color to red so we can see it as opposed to the others. So for example, I can, let's say I want to color the gray sections of the cylinder red. I can select the, or right click on the Lambert 1 and hit select objects in that material, like that. And then I can right click on the blin material, and I can hit assign material to selection. And then when I deselect, you'll see that they've applied to that area. So that's a basic look at the Hypershade. It's a really, really good tool to get used to. It's great for creating complex materials and shading networks, but it can get a little bit complex at times when you're getting to more advanced levels of material and shader network connections. So customize yourself, acclimatize yourself to it. It definitely does come in handy. And for those of you who are using newer versions of the software, or are looking at newer versions of the software that incorporate the node editor, which you can see just here, this is basically any versions from Maya 2013 upwards. Basically, this is a slightly more advanced version of this work area. And it's even it's sort of even easier to use. To give you a quick idea, you can basically expand out these nodes, and this gives you all the settings in your, in this case this is the Fong material we made. All these settings here are the same settings as what you have over here, and you can directly connect parts of some nodes by dragging and dropping them and plugging them directly into other nodes, which is a little bit easier than using that standard old school work area just here. But they are very similar. So I'm going to leave this video here, and I will see you next time.